Roan Derek stood on the bridge of his ship, the Rusty Faithful, a name so accurate it was almost satirical. With half the consoles flickering like a malfunctioning disco ball and a hull that whistled a symphony of despair every time it turned left, it was the perfect representation of Roan's life choices. If he squinted just right, the distant nebula might have looked beautiful, but squinting only reminded him of his last eye exam and the astronomic debt that came with new lenses. "Hey, boss," crackled a voice from the intercom. "Found something that might interest you." Roan sighed. "If it's another broken toaster, you can shove it," he replied, but he trudged toward the cargo bay anyway. The voice belonged to Trix, his engineer and the closest thing he had to a friend, though the word friend might be pushing it. More like a mutually beneficial parasite. He meandered through the corridors, each twist and turn a testament to the Rusty Faithful's will to remain airborne, or spaceborne, as it were. The cargo bay door screeched open with the kind of drama usually reserved for horror movie soundtracks. Trix stood amidst a pile of assorted junk and what looked like the remains of a vending machine that had lost a fight with a sledgehammer. "Look," she said, pointing to a half-buried metal plate. "Pre-collapse consortium tech." Roan's heart skipped a beat. "Is it intact?" "Mostly," Trix shrugged. "But that's like saying this ship mostly works." Roan grinned, a rare occurrence. "If it can get us a half-decent thruster, we might be able to outrun our sins for a while." "A noble goal," Trix replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm thick enough to drown in. The scrapyard stretched out around them, a graveyard of forgotten dreams and abandoned ambitions. Once, these ships had traversed the stars, but now they were nothing more than a junkie's treasure trove. If you were desperate enough, you could find anything here. Engines, weapons, even a functioning toilet seat if the stars aligned in your favor. Roan often daydreamed of harnessing all this wasted potential, like some kind of cosmic Marie Kondo, tidying up the galaxy by forming a new society out of rust and regret. But dreams were like the Rusty Faithful, barely held together and prone to sudden explosions. "What do you think of my plan, Trix?" Roan asked, scanning the horizons of derelict ships with a hopeful eye. "You mean your plan to become the space messiah of the outcasts?" Trix asked, smirking. "Some might call it ambitious, others might call it suicidal." "I prefer visionary," Roan corrected, though he couldn't quite keep the edge of doubt from his voice. Before Trix could retort, an unfamiliar blip echoed through the ship. "Incoming vessel," a mechanical voice announced from the intercom, with all the emotion of a bored librarian. "Well, that's either salvation or a really bad sales pitch," Roan muttered. He and Trix exchanged a glance that carried years of shared misadventures and near misses. They made their way to the decrepit control room, each step a reminder of the ship's precarious state. Roan flicked a switch and the view screen hummed to life, showing a sleek, ominous vessel approaching. Its design was alien, all sharp angles and unsettling symmetry. "Looks expensive," Trix said, crossing her arms. "Think they'd trade for some homemade moonshine." "If they're here to trade," Roan replied, his mind racing through a catalog of possibilities, none of them good. The alien ship docked with an elegance that made the Rusty Faithful's existence seem like a cosmic joke. The airlock hissed open, revealing a tall, slender figure. Its skin was a shimmering silver, eyes like twin voids searching for something hidden in Roan's soul. "Greetings, human," it spoke, voice smooth as polished steel. "I am Anna's, envoy of the Benevolent Accord." "Benevolent, huh?" Roan replied, crossing his arms. "That's a new one. Most folks out here are out for themselves accord." Anna's tilted its head, a gesture that might have been confusion or pity, hard to tell with aliens. "I bring an offer," it said, ignoring Roan's jab. "Can't wait to hear this," Trix muttered, leaning against a console. "Our people have observed the entropy of your scrapyard," Anna's continued. "We propose a pact. In exchange for your cooperation, we offer protection from the anomaly." Roan raised an eyebrow. "Anomaly?" Anna's eyes darkened, a starless night sky. "A black hole is forming, consuming all it touches." The room fell silent, the weight of impending doom heavy in the recycled air. Well, isn't that just peachy? Roan finally said, his voice laced with sarcasm. So you're saying we're about to be swallowed by cosmic indigestion unless we shake hands and join your little club? Precisely, Anna's replied, as though it had offered a particularly appealing gift. Roan glanced at Trix, who shrugged. At least it's not a pyramid scheme, she offered. What do you get out of it? Roan asked, suspicion coloring his tone. Your people have untapped potential, Anna said. In unity you may achieve what we have not. And if we say no, Roan pushed, though he suspected he knew the answer. Then you shall face oblivion alone, Anna's replied, and its voice was as cold as the depths of space. Roan rubbed his temples, the weight of 1,000 bad decisions pressing down. I'll think about it, he said finally, the words tasting like ash. Anna's nodded. Do not ponder long, it said before turning and retreating into its ship. As the alien vessel undocked and disappeared into the void, Roan and Trix were left standing in the decaying shell of their dreams. Well, Trix said, breaking the silence. Looks like it's either join the Intergalactic Book Club or become a black hole's lunch special. Yeah, Roan replied, staring into the endless expanse. Just another day in paradise. He didn't trust the alien envoy any more than he trusted his ship to make it through another day without falling apart. But as much as he hated to admit it, the prospect of uniting the Scrapyard's scattered factions under a common banner, one of survival, might not be so crazy after all. Roan took a deep breath, letting hope bubble up despite the odds. You know, he said, turning to Trix, maybe this is the kick in the ass we need. And if it goes all belly up, Trix asked, arching an eyebrow. Then I'll die knowing I tried, Roan said with a shrug. For a moment neither spoke. Then Trix grinned. You're an idiot, Roan Derex, but you're my kind of idiot. Let's see if we can shove this cosmic puzzle piece together before the universe decides we're not worth the trouble. With a shared nod, they turned back to the scrapyard, their eyes scanning the endless debris field for the next part of their improbable plan. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble in a galaxy full of bad hands and rigged decks. But Roan was used to playing the fool, and sometimes, just sometimes, the fool came out on top. Roan Derek stared at the empty space where the alien envoy's ship had disappeared, feeling like he'd been left holding the universe's most explosive hot potato. Well, Trix, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck, we're caught between a black hole and an agreement with an alien called Anna's. Just another day, right? Trix chuckled, shaking her head. I just hope the black hole's more forgiving than my last ex, Roan snorted. No guarantees in this galaxy, but at least a black hole doesn't demand alimony. They headed back to the cargo bay, their minds churning with the implications of Anna's so-called benevolent offer. Roan found his gaze wandering over the jumble of parts and scrap, all potential pieces of a very complicated puzzle. So, Trix started, as they picked their way through the debris, what's the plan, Captain? Join the Interstellar Neighborhood Watch and hope they don't have a secret agenda involving tentacles and mind control. Roan sighed, scratching at a stubborn itch just under his collar. That or we sit pretty while every atom we own gets sucked into cosmic oblivion. Not exactly a smorgasbord of options. As they reached the heart of the scrapyard, Roan paused, looking at the half-buried consortium thruster they'd found earlier. It seemed to glimmer in the dim light, a reminder of forgotten technologies and lost eras. This thing might just give us the edge we need, he mused. Assuming it doesn't blow up in our faces, Trix quipped. I've seen more reliable kitchen appliances. Roan chuckled dryly. Hell, I've had toasters that lasted longer than some marriages. The humor was short-lived, though, as the weight of their predicament settled back over them like a leaden cloak. Roan turned serious, his face creasing with the kind of worry that only came from staring too long into the abyss, or his bills. We need more info on this benevolent accord and what they really want from us, he said finally. Because I don't buy the whole unity and protection spiel. Trix nodded, her expression matching his grim resolve. Agreed. We should ask around, see if any of the other scrapyard stragglers have had dealings with them. Right. And let's keep this under wraps, Roan added, lowering his voice as if the walls had ears. "The last thing we need is a panic." A silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken fears and the ghosts of past failures. Roan looked at Trix, a slight smirk touching his lips. "Ready to play intergalactic detective?" Trix grinned. "Always wanted to be a private eye in space." "I just hope our first case doesn't end with us being atomized." With a shared nod, they headed back to the Rusty Faithful, the ship groaning in reluctant acceptance of their return. Roan tapped at a console, bringing up a list of known contacts in the scrapyard. "All right, let's start with someone who owes us a favor or two." "That narrows it down to no one," Trix said dryly, peering over his shoulder. Roan feigned offense, clutching his chest theatrically. "You wound me, Trix. I'd like to think we've got at least one friend out here who'll take our call." "Only if they are too drunk to know better," Trix shot back, her eyes twinkling with mischief. After a few unsuccessful attempts, they finally managed to connect with Jarn Grubbin, a salvager with a knack for turning junk into semi-functional tech, or, as Roan liked to call it, space Mac jivering. "Jarn?" Roan exclaimed, putting on his best used car salesman smile. "Long time no see." The screen crackled to life, revealing Jarn's grizzled mug, his face a mosaic of grease and battle scars. "Roan Derex," he grumbled, squinting as if the very act of seeing was an inconvenience. "What hole have you crawled out of this time?" "Just orbiting the usual dumpster fires," Roan replied. "Listen, we had a visit from a shiny alien who wants to make us an offer we can't refuse. Know anything about a group calling themselves the Benevolent Accord?" Jarn snorted, a sound like gravel grinding under a boot. "Benevolent, my left foot. Their trouble, Roan. Bunch of power-hungry bastards looking to expand their territory." "Called it," Trix muttered, crossing her arms with a self-satisfied nod. Roan frowned. "And their deal? Sounds like they want us to join their happy family for protection against some cosmic threat." "Protection? More like conscription," Jarn spat. "They're not looking for partners, they're looking for cannon fodder." Roan felt a chill run down his spine. "And if we refuse, then you're just another obstacle they'll blast out of the way," Jarn said, his voice grim. "Seen it happen before." A heavy silence followed, the kind that was all too common in Roan's line of work. "Thanks for the heads up, Jarn," Roan said, managing a tight smile. "We owe you one. Just make sure you don't pay me back by inviting those bastards over for tea," Jarn replied before cutting the connection. Roan and Trix sat back, the weight of their situation pressing down on them like an anvil. "Well," Roan said finally, "looks like we're in deeper shit than a sewer rat." Trix sighed, running a hand through her hair. "So what's the plan, Captain?" "Align with the local space mafia or try our luck against a black hole." Roan closed his eyes, weighing the options or lack thereof. "We need more allies, people who will back us if this turns ugly." Trix arched an eyebrow. "And how do you plan to convince them? Promise them a cut of our non-existent profits?" Roan chuckled humorlessly. "We offer them the one thing everyone in this galaxy wants." "Which is?" "A fighting chance," Roan said, a glint of determination in his eyes. "We make them see that sticking together is the only way to survive what's coming." Trix nodded slowly. "All right. Let's gather the troops and see who's willing to follow a madman into the jaws of hell." With a plan, albeit a shaky one, in place, they set to work, reaching out to various factions scattered across the scrapyard. It was a ragtag bunch, a collection of misfits and renegades who called this forgotten corner of the universe home. But they were survivors, and if there was one thing Roan had learned, it was that survivors made the best allies. As the days passed, word spread through the scrapyard like wildfire. Roan and Trix found themselves at the center of a growing resistance, a coalition of the desperate and the determined. It was a gamble, and Roan knew they were playing with loaded dice, but it was better than waiting for annihilation. At a hastily arranged gathering, Roan stood before a motley crowd of fellow scavengers, each face lined with the weariness of 1,000 hardships. Trix stood by his side, her presence a steady anchor in the chaos. "All right, folks," Roan began, his voice carrying over the low hum of conversation. "You've all heard the rumors by now. We've got a choice to make: bend the knee to an alien regime or stand together and show them we're not just scraps to be swept aside." A murmur went through the crowd, a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. "We don't have much," Roan continued, "but we have each other, and if we work together we might just make it through this in one piece." He let the words hang in the air, watching as the crowd absorbed them. A few nodded, a flicker of hope shining through the grime and fatigue. "Who's with us?" Trix called out, her voice ringing with conviction. For a moment there was only silence. Then one by one hands started to rise, a tentative show of solidarity. Roan felt a swell of pride and relief, tempered by the knowledge of the battles yet to come. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was a start. A foundation to build upon, a flicker of defiance in the dark. As the gathering dispersed, Roan turned to Trix with a tired smile. "Well, looks like we've got ourselves a motley crew." Trix shrugged, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Always said you were a magnet for trouble. Guess I should have specified what kind." "Trouble's what keeps life interesting," Roan replied with a wry grin. "And who knows? Maybe this time we won't end up as cosmic dust." "You're betting an awful lot on a maybe," Trix pointed out, though her tone was more teasing than chastising. Roan shrugged, the weight of leadership settling comfortably on his shoulders. "In this universe, maybe's the best anyone gets." Together they watched the stars wheel overhead, a silent testament to the vast, indifferent cosmos. But for once, Roan felt a flicker of hope beneath the layers of cynicism and doubt. It was fragile, like a candle in the darkness, but it was enough to keep him going. As they prepared for the challenges ahead, Roan couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this time they'd come out on top. Roan Derek stood on the bridge of the Rusty Faithful, contemplating the universe's most persistent question. Why was everything always so damn difficult? Around him, the ship wheezed and groaned like an asthmatic dinosaur, a constant reminder of both its age and Roan's precarious financial situation. "Captain," Trix's voice cut in, sharp as ever. "You look like you're trying to solve the mysteries of the universe with a hangover," Roan grunted. "Close enough. Just thinking about our new friends, the Benevolent Accord. More like benevolent discord, if you ask me. Yeah, they sound like the kind of guys who'd offer you a seat just to pull it out from under you." Trix leaned back, crossing her arms. "So what's the plan?" Besides avoiding becoming alien cannon fodder, Roan glanced at the array of outdated tech cluttering the bridge, each piece a potential part of their salvation or their demise. "First, let's see if we can scrape together an alliance of sorts. I hear there are others like us, folks with a bone to pick with our benevolent overlords." "Ah, so we're forming the Space Misfits Club. Hope there's a badge for that." "Just think of it as the galaxy's worst-kept secret," Roan replied with a wry smile. "If we can gather enough support, we might stand a slim chance." Trix leaned forward, eyes gleaming with that reckless curiosity Roan had grown to appreciate, mostly. "And where do we find these brave souls willing to join the rebellion?" Roan checked the console, tapping at buttons with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent half his life coaxing cooperation out of stubborn machinery. "There's a bar on the outer rim of the Scrapyard. If there's anywhere we can find allies, it's there. Misery loves company, or so they say. Or a stiff drink," Trix added. "Either way, I'm in. Just let me grab my good blaster." With that, they set off, the Rusty Faithful lumbering through the scrapyard like a drunken whale navigating a sea of junk. The bar in question was a ramshackle establishment affectionately dubbed the Last Hope, a name that spoke volumes about its patrons and their collective fortunes. As they docked, Roan took a moment to appreciate the scene. The place was a hodgepodge of derelict ships and makeshift structures, each one a testament to desperation and ingenuity. It was the kind of place where dreams came to die, and sometimes, just occasionally, where new ones were born. Inside, the bar was a cacophony of noise and questionable odors. The clientele was a mix of scavengers, smugglers, and assorted riffraff, each with their own tales of woe. Roan and Trix made their way to a corner table, drawing a few curious glances but nothing more. "All right," Roan began, leaning in conspiratorially. "Let's see if we can find someone who knows the lay of the land." Trix surveyed the room, her eyes landing on a grizzled figure nursing a drink like it was the last thing holding him together. "What about that guy?" "He looks like he's seen a thing or two." Roan followed her gaze and nodded. "Worth a shot. Let's hope he's not too far gone to make sense." They approached cautiously, taking seats opposite the man who glanced up with a weary gaze. "You two don't look like regulars," he remarked, voice rough as sandpaper. "We're not," Roan admitted. "Name's Roan Derex, this is Trix. We're looking for people who might have a bone to pick with the benevolent accord." The man's eyes narrowed, assessing. "Depends on who's asking. Why should I care?" Roan leaned forward, dropping his voice. "Because we've got a plan to turn the tables. Use the very scraps they've overlooked to hit back." The man grunted, intrigued despite himself. "You got guts, I'll give you that. Name's Cal Vex. And yeah, I've got no love for those bastards. What do you need?" Trix smirked. "A few good folks willing to stick it to our alien overlords. Figure you might know where to find them." Cal took a swig from his drink, considering. "There's a group. Call themselves the Rust Rats. Bunch of scavengers who've had enough of being pushed around. They're holed up in the east sector, last I heard." Roan nodded, filing the information away. "Thanks, Cal. We'll lay low until we can make contact. You in?" Cal shrugged, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Hell, why not? Not like I've got anything better to do." With their first ally secured, Roan and Trix returned to their ship, a sense of momentum beginning to build. It was a mad plan, possibly even suicidal, but it was all they had. Back aboard the Rusty Faithful, Roan pored over a makeshift map of the scrapyard, plotting their next move. "All right, next stop, the Rust Rats. Let's see if we can get them on board." Trix gave him a sideways look. "You really think we can pull this off?" "I mean, I'm all for sticking it to the man, or alien in this case, but we're a ragtag bunch going up against a coalition." Roan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "What choice do we have? It's either this or wait for the inevitable boot to drop. Besides, I've always been a fan of the underdog." "Well, if we're gonna be underdogs, let's at least be the ones with a bite," Trix said, her grin as sharp as ever. The next day found them navigating the scrapyard's convoluted pathways, each turn bringing them closer to the Rust Rats' territory. It was an area marked by heaps of scrap and half-finished projects, a testament to both their tenacity and limited resources. Roan and Trix approached cautiously, hands lifted in a universal sign of peace. A group of scrappy individuals emerged from the shadows, each one armed with an assortment of makeshift weapons. "Who are you and what do you want?" demanded a woman at the front, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "Name's Roan Derex. This is Trix. We're here because we heard you might be looking for a way to hit back at the benevolent accord." The woman narrowed her eyes, sizing them up. "And why should we trust you?" "Because we're just like you," Trix interjected, her voice steady. "We're tired of being pushed around, tired of being told what we can and can't do. We have a plan, but we can't do it alone." There was a moment of silence as the woman considered their words. Finally, she nodded. "All right, let's hear what you've got." Roan and Trix explained their idea: to use the scraps of forgotten technology to create weapons and defenses capable of turning the tides. It was ambitious, maybe even a little reckless, but it was the kind of plan that just might work given the right circumstances. The woman listened intently, her expression shifting from skepticism to interest. "Name's Mira," she said at last. "And you're right, we've had enough. If you've got the guts to see this through, then so do we." With that, the Rust Rats were on board, their numbers swelling the ranks of Roan's fledgling rebellion. It was a diverse group, united by a shared desire for freedom and a disdain for authority. As the days passed, they worked tirelessly, transforming the scrapyard into a makeshift fortress. Old ships were repurposed, their engines converted into weapons, and their hulls turned into barricades. Roan watched the transformation with a mix of pride and trepidation. They were making progress, but the clock was ticking, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the benevolent Accord caught wind of their activities. "We're really doing this," Trix remarked one evening as they surveyed the fortified scrapyard. Roan nodded, a steely resolve in his eyes. "We are, and we'll show them that humans aren't so easily cowed. We're not just scraps, we're survivors." Trix grinned, a fierce light in her eyes. "Let's just make sure we don't end up as cosmic roadkill in the process." Roan chuckled, the sound tinged with both amusement and nerves. "That's the plan, partner. Now let's make sure we have something to show for it when the dust settles." As they prepared for the battles to come, Roan couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental. It was a gamble, a shot in the dark, but it was the best damn chance they had. And in a universe as vast and unforgiving as theirs, that was more than enough. The rusty faithful lurched through space like a drunken uncle at a wedding, all clattering bits and rusty edges. Roan sat in his customary seat on the bridge, a perpetual scowl etched on his face. "Well," Trix said, fiddling with a piece of outdated tech that looked like it had been through a couple of decades of bad decisions, "we've got the rust rats on our side. What's next? Form a knitting club." Roan huffed out a laugh. "Nah, I was thinking more along the lines of a dramatic first strike. Something to let the benevolent Accord know we're not just a bunch of washed-up has-beens." "Bold move, Captain. Got a plan that's not completely suicidal." "Not really. But when has that ever stopped us?" Roan leaned forward, examining the console. "There's a comms relay on the edge of the scrapyard. Taking it out might make the Accord a little less benevolent and a lot more pissed off." "Ah, poking the bear. Classic Roan move." Trix grinned, the kind of grin that suggested she wasn't entirely against the idea. "I'm in. Let's give those aliens something to remember us by." As they plotted their course, the bridge was filled with the clatter of metal and the occasional spark from Trix's ongoing battle with the ship's outdated tech. The rusty faithful might not have been the sharpest tool in the shed, but it was their tool, and they were going to wield it with reckless abandon. "We'll need to move fast," Roan said, eyes fixed on the map. "Hit them before they even realize we're here." "Got it. Quick in, quick out." "Like a bad date," Trix replied, strapping herself in with the kind of casual confidence that only came from years of being on the wrong side of life's equations. The plan was simple enough. Sneak up on the comms relay, plant a couple of explosives, and watch the fireworks. Simple, yet terrifying, just the way Roan liked it. It was the kind of job that could either go off without a hitch or explode spectacularly in their faces. As the rusty faithful drew closer to the relay, the atmosphere in the ship grew tense. The metal beast groaned and creaked, protesting the sudden burst of activity. Roan could relate. His bones felt like they creaked too, every time he moved. Trix was at the helm, her fingers dancing over the controls with the precision of someone who'd spent a little too much time gambling with fate. She shot Roan a sideways glance. "Ready to make some noise, Captain?" "Never been readier," Roan answered, even if his stomach didn't quite agree. With a flick of a switch, they descended on the comms relay, the rusty faithful moving with a speed that defied its age. Trix guided the ship with the skill of a veteran fighter pilot, weaving between the hulking pieces of scrap that littered the area. The relay came into view, a spindly structure that looked like it would snap in a strong breeze. Roan couldn't help but grin. "Looks like we found our target. Good thing we're not playing nice," Trix remarked, her hand steady on the controls as Roan prepared to deploy the explosives. With a quick nod to Trix, Roan armed the charges, his mind racing with the possibilities. Would the benevolent Accord even notice one little relay going dark, or would they come down on them like a ton of alien bricks? "Charges set," Roan said, his voice a touch too calm for comfort. "Let's get out of here before someone decides to rain on our parade." "Copy that," Trix replied, nudging the rusty faithful into gear. But as they turned to leave, the universe decided it wasn't quite done with them. The peaceful void of space lit up with the unmistakable glow of hostile ships dropping out of warp. "Looks like they noticed," Trix said, her voice edged with the kind of excitement that only came from dancing on the razor's edge. "Time to go," Roan replied, hitting the detonation switch with a grim sense of satisfaction. The relay exploded in a shower of sparks, a brilliant flower of destruction blooming against the backdrop of the scrapyard. The hostile ships, however, were less impressed and more intent on turning the rusty faithful into cosmic debris. "Incoming!" Trix shouted, wrenching the controls as the first volley of laser fire slashed through space, narrowly missing them. They darted through the scrapyard, a frantic game of cat and mouse where the cat had claws the size of battle cruisers. The rusty faithful dodged and weaved, its old engines pushed to the limit. "Keep us moving, Trix," Roan barked, his eyes glued to the display as he tried to outmaneuver their pursuers. "I'm trying, but this old lady ain't exactly nimble," Trix retorted, her grip white-knuckled on the controls. The alien ships were relentless, their advanced tech making a mockery of the rusty faithful's outdated systems. Roan's heart sank as he watched the display. They were outnumbered and outgunned. "Brace yourself," Trix yelled, swerving the ship just in time to avoid a direct hit. The explosive shockwave rocked them, sending Roan sprawling from his seat. He grunted as he hit the floor, a reminder that gravity was still very much in effect. "Status," Roan called out, scrambling back to his feet. "Could be worse," Trix replied, her tone a mix of grim determination and gallows humor. "Could be dead. Small mercies," Roan muttered, his eyes darting across the controls as he tried to think of a plan that didn't end with them as space dust. Their escape was a harrowing blend of luck and desperation, each evasive maneuver bringing them closer to safety, or at least the illusion of it. The alien ships gradually fell behind, their pursuit hampered by the scrapyard's chaotic landscape. Finally, the rusty faithful broke free of the debris field, limping away like a wounded animal. Roan exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing ever so slightly. "Well, that was fun," Trix said, her voice breathless but triumphant. Roan managed a chuckle. "If that's your idea of fun, remind me never to let you plan a vacation." But their victory was short-lived. As they regrouped with the rust rats back at the scrapyard, it became clear that their defiance had not gone unnoticed or unpunished. "We've got a problem," Mira said, meeting them as they disembarked. Her face was a storm cloud of concern. "The Accord retaliated, hit us hard while you were out playing hero." Roan's stomach twisted, a knot of guilt and anger. "How bad?" "Bad enough," Mira replied, gesturing to the smoldering wreckage that had once been a part of their makeshift fortress. "We lost people, good people." Trix's expression sobered, the thrill of their escape replaced with a far heavier burden. "Damn it, we didn't think they'd strike back so quickly." "Well, they did," Mira snapped, her frustration palpable. "And now we're down to scraps, both in terms of resources and morale." Roan ran a hand through his hair, the weight of leadership pressing down on him with crushing force. He'd known the risks, but knowing didn't make the reality any easier to swallow. "We need to regroup," Roan said, forcing a measure of calm into his voice. "Figure out our next move." "Next move?" Mira echoed, incredulity threading her tone. "We barely survived this one. How many more of our people are you willing to sacrifice for your gamble?" Roan met her gaze, the fire of determination in his eyes. "Enough to make it count. We're in this together, Mira. We stand or fall as one." "Easy for you to say when you're not the one picking up the pieces," Mira shot back, her anger a bitter edge. Trix stepped in, her voice firm. "We knew the risks, Mira. We're all in this because we all want the same thing, freedom from those alien bastards." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The alliance, fragile as it was, teetered on the brink of fracture. But then Cal Vex, who'd been watching the exchange with a grim expression, spoke up. "Enough," Cal said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "We knew damn well what we were getting into. This isn't the time to point fingers. It's time to unite." Mira hesitated, her shoulders sagging as the anger bled away, replaced by a weary resignation. "All right, but we need a better plan. One that doesn't leave us bleeding." Roan nodded, grateful for the reprieve. "Agreed. We'll rally the troops, patch up what we can, and prepare for the next round." The reality of their losses hung over them like a dark cloud, an ever-present reminder of the cost of rebellion. But despite the setbacks, the fire in Roan's eyes never dimmed. They spent the next few days licking their wounds, repairing what was left of their fortress and reinforcing their defenses. It was a race against time, each ire bringing them closer to the inevitable confrontation with the Accord. Roan worked tirelessly, his mind a whirlwind of strategies and contingencies. He knew they couldn't afford another hit like the last one, and the pressure of leadership weighed heavily on him. One evening, as he sat alone in the ship's cramped galley, nursing a cup of something that vaguely resembled coffee, Trix joined him. "Can't sleep?" she asked, sliding into the seat opposite him. "Sleep's a luxury I can't afford right now," Roan replied, a hint of a smile on his lips despite the exhaustion etched into his features. "You're doing your best, you know," Trix said, her tone uncharacteristically gentle. "Best might not be enough," Roan admitted, rubbing a hand over his face. "But it's all we've got." "Well, if we're going down fighting," Trix said, her eyes gleaming with the kind of reckless optimism that had gotten them into this mess in the first place. Roan chuckled, shaking his head. "You and your damn optimism. Someone's got to balance out your cynicism," Trix shot back, grinning. Despite the gravity of their situation, Roan found comfort in her words. They were in this together, for better or worse, and that was something worth fighting for. The following days were a blur of activity, the Alliance working double shifts to shore up their defenses and prepare for the inevitable retaliation. The Scrapyard was a hive of activity, a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. Roan moved among them, offering words of encouragement and lending a hand where he could. He was their leader, but more importantly, he was one of them, bound by shared hardship and a common cause. As the sun set on another day, Roan stood on the deck of the Rusty Faithful, gazing out over the scrapyard. The remnants of their first strike lay scattered around them, a stark reminder of both their defiance and their vulnerability. But despite the odds, despite the losses, Roan felt a flicker of hope. They had survived against all expectations, and they weren't done fighting yet. "Ready for round two?" Trix asked, joining him at the railing. "Ready as I'll ever be," Roan replied, his voice steady. They stood together, watching as the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, a cosmic dance of possibility and peril, just waiting to be unraveled. In that moment, Roan knew one thing for certain. They were more than just scraps in the eyes of the universe. They were survivors, and they were far from finished. Roan Derek sat in the cramped cockpit of the Rusty Faithful, the weight of the universe pressing down on his shoulders like a particularly clingy ex. His eyes were fixed on the star-speckled void outside, though his mind was elsewhere entirely, lost in the depths of what felt like an unwinnable war. The benevolent Accord had them on the ropes, their backs against the cold, unforgiving vacuum of space, and the idea of victory seemed as far-fetched as a two-headed space cow. "Is it me, or is the universe out to get us?" Roan muttered, half to himself, half to the busted heap of metal he called a ship. Trix, ever the optimist, or perhaps just a glutton for punishment, poked her head into the cockpit. "Remember what your old man used to say, Roan. If it ain't trying to kill you, it's not worth worrying about." "Yeah, Dad had a way with motivational speeches," Roan replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "But I'm starting to think he was just trying to justify his reckless gambling habits." Trix shrugged, the movement casual but her eyes serious. "Well, he did win us this ship in a poker game, so there's that." "Assuming win is the right word for inheriting a wreck," Roan said, gesturing around at the Rusty Faithful's cluttered interior. It was a symphony of outdated tech and half-finished repairs, each piece a testament to Trix's relentless tinkering and Roan's desperate attempts to keep them flying. "She's got character," Trix replied, patting a bulkhead with a kind of fond exasperation. "Besides, there's nothing wrong with old tech. Sometimes the classics are just what you need." "Tell that to the benevolent Accord," Roan grumbled. "Their ships are basically flying fortresses, Meanwhile, we're held together with duct tape and hope. Trix leaned against the doorway, her expression turning thoughtful. You think we can pull off another miracle, Captain? Or is this where the story ends with us as space dust? Depends, Roan said, rubbing the back of his neck. You think we can find a miracle lying around in a scrapyard? Miracles are just old junk with good PR, Trix replied with a grin, her eyes twinkling like mischief incarnate. Roan chuckled, though it was a humorless sound. Well, we better get our PR team working overtime then. As if summoned by their conversation, Mira appeared, her face a grim mask of determination. We've patched up as much as we can, Captain, but morale's in the gutter. People are scared, and frankly, I don't blame them. Roan nodded, the knot in his gut tightening. Yeah, can't say I blame them either, but running's not exactly an option. Unless someone's got a spare warp drive they forgot to mention, Mira snorted, crossing her arms. Not unless you count that relic of a consortium thruster sitting out in the scrapyard. Roan's ears perked up like a bloodhound on the scent of fresh trouble. Wait a minute, that thing's still around. Yeah, Mira replied, looking skeptical. But using it would be like trying to jump-start a dead horse with a lightning rod. Exactly the kind of reckless strategy I like, Roan said, his eyes lighting up with a dangerous glint. Let's take a look. The trio found themselves in the scrapyard's graveyard of forgotten tech, a place that smelled faintly of ozone and bad decisions. Roan picked his way through the debris, Trix at his side, while Mira lingered a few paces back, her skepticism palpable. There it is, Trix said, pointing to a hulking piece of machinery that had seen better centuries. The consortium thruster, a relic from a time when humans thought they could outsmart the universe. Roan crouched beside it, running a hand over its corroded surface. Looks like the universe had the last laugh. More like a cackle, Trix agreed. But if we can get it working, it might just give us the edge we need. Or blow us to bits, Mira added, her voice dripping with pragmatic realism. But hey, at this point, what's a little more risk, right? That's the spirit, Roan replied, his tone equal parts sarcasm and determination. Trix, think you can work your magic on this thing? Trix frowned, eyeing the thruster like a puzzle she was itching to solve. It's gonna take some time, and a lot of luck, but yeah, I think I can manage. Good, Roan said, clapping her on the shoulder. Because if this doesn't work, well, I hear the afterlife's got a hell of a view. As Trix set to work, Roan felt the weight of leadership settle back onto his shoulders like a particularly unwelcome cloak. He turned to Mira, who was watching the proceedings with a mix of hope and resignation. How are the others holding up? Roan asked, his voice quieter now that it was just the two of them. Like a bunch of cats in a rainstorm, Mira replied, her expression softening slightly. They're scared, Roan, and tired, but they trust you. Roan snorted, the sound more bitter than amused. Trust is easy when there are no other options. Don't sell yourself short, Mira said, a rare note of encouragement in her voice. You've kept us alive this long. That's gotta count for something. Roan rubbed a hand over his face, the exhaustion creeping in around the edges. Yeah, well, let's hope it counts for enough. The days blurred together, a frenetic race against time as Trix worked her magic on the thruster. The rest of the Alliance did what they could, patching defenses and making plans, though the specter of failure loomed over them all like a black hole waiting to swallow them whole. Roan slept in fits and starts, haunted by nightmares of ships burning and friends lost to the void. Each time he closed his eyes, the faces of those they had lost stared back at him, accusing and silent. Captain, Trix's voice crackled over the comm one morning, pulling Roan from yet another restless attempt at sleep. You might want to come see this. His heart skipped a beat, part hope, part dread. He made his way back to the scrapyard, finding Trix standing triumphant beside the thruster, grease smudged across her face and a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. You sure you're not a miracle worker? Roan asked, a grin breaking through his fatigue. Just a girl who hates losing, Trix replied, wiping her hands on her jumpsuit. But this baby's ready for a test run. Let's fire her up then, Roan said, clapping his hands together. What's the worst that could happen? Famous last words, Mira muttered, though even she couldn't disguise the flicker of excitement in her eyes. They stood back as Trix initiated the startup sequence, the thruster rumbling to life with a noise that was equal parts mechanical protest and grudging cooperation. The ground vibrated beneath them, but when the thruster settled into a steady hum, there was no denying the surge of hope that rippled through the group. "Well, I'll be damned," Roan said, his voice barely audible over the thruster's song. "We might just have a fighting chance after all." "Don't get cocky just yet," Trix warned, though her smile betrayed her own optimism. "We've still got a lot of work to do. Work's never stopped us before," Roan replied, turning to face the group that had gathered to witness their potential salvation. "All right, folks, we've got ourselves a bit of breathing room, but we're not out of the woods yet." Mira stepped forward, crossing her arms. "What's the plan, Captain?" "Simple," Roan said, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. "We hit him where it hurts. Hard and fast, leave him reeling. And then," someone from the back called out, doubt threading their voice. "And then we pray to whatever gods are listening that this works," Roan replied, his eyes sweeping over the assembled faces. "But if there's one thing I know, it's that we're not going down without a fight." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, the thruster's steady hum a reminder that they had more than just words on their side now. They had a weapon, a relic of a time when humanity had dared to challenge the stars. That night, as Roan lay awake in his bunk, he found himself staring at the ceiling, the familiar weight of leadership mingling with the unfamiliar spark of hope. It was a precarious balance, one he knew could tip either way at a moment's notice. But for the first time in a long time, the prospect of victory didn't seem like a fool's errand. It seemed possible, if not probable, and that was enough to keep him fighting. In the end, Roan mused, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about standing up and saying, "Not today," even when the universe seemed intent on proving otherwise. And as he closed his eyes, he allowed himself the luxury of believing that maybe, just maybe, they'd live to see another day. Roan stared at the consortium thruster, which now hummed like a cantankerous old man who just remembered the words to his favorite song. It was a miracle of sorts, though Roan would never admit it out loud. Miracles were for fairy tales. This was pure, unadulterated desperation masked as hope. "All right, everyone," Roan called out, attempting to disguise his anxiety with bravado. "I think it's time we gave our friends at the Benevolent Accord a little surprise party. Invitations, annoyances, the whole shebang." The crew of the Rusty Faithful gathered around, their faces a mix of skepticism and forced optimism. If belief alone could propel them through this war, they'd have been victorious ages ago. Turns out, you still needed a working ship. Trix slapped Roan on the back, leaving a grease-smudged handprint on his jacket. "Ready to play chicken with the universe, Captain. Wouldn't have it any other way," Roan replied, grinning like a man who'd just been dared to eat the galaxy's hottest pepper. "Let's see how the Accord likes it when we play out of their rulebook." Mira crossed her arms, a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. "Great. We're relying on a piece of tech older than my grandma's recipes. What could possibly go wrong?" Roan chuckled, half expecting the universe to make good on Mira's sarcasm. "If it all goes sideways, tell my enemies I died doing what I loved, defying orders and making things explode." The crew busied themselves with final preparations, leaving Roan to ponder how they ended up relying on a machine that looked like it had been dragged through several layers of hell. But hey, if it worked, they'd be the ones laughing all the way to victory. Or, to their graves. A few days later, the Rusty Faithful was decked out with the refurbished thruster, looking like a mashup between a junkyard and a fireworks display ready to go off. Roan stood on the bridge, surrounded by outdated tech and outdated friends, each piece a potential hero or a ticking time bomb. "All right, people," Roan barked, wrapping the familiar cloak of leadership around him once more. "Today we give the Accord a reason to regret ever crossing paths with us." Trix bounced on her heels, the gleam in her eyes more potent than any weapon. Ready to push this baby to her limits, Captain. Just say the word. Roan nodded, a crooked smile tugging at his lips. Light the candle, Trix. The thruster roared to life, the ship vibrating with a newfound power that felt almost alien, yet exhilarating. For a moment, Roan was convinced they might just pull off the impossible. As the rusty faithful shot through the void, the Alliance ships rallied behind them, their collective resolve forging a path into the heart of enemy territory. The plan was simple: hit the Accord where it hurt, sow chaos, and then retreat before the dust settled. Looks like we've got their attention, Mira noted, pointing at the comm screen which flickered with frantic enemy chatter. And here I thought we weren't popular, Roan quipped, a sardonic edge coloring his words. Let's give them a show. The ensuing battle was a blur of laser fire and evasive maneuvers, the rust rats diving into the fray with reckless abandon. For every blow the Accord dealt, the Alliance was there to return it tenfold, their desperation lending them a ferocity that caught their enemies off guard. Roan watched the chaos unfold, his heart pounding in time with the thruster's rhythmic hum. Each success was a shot of adrenaline, but the specter of failure loomed ever closer, whispering sinister promises of defeat. Just as it seemed they might gain the upper hand, the universe decided it was time to remind them of its delightful sense of humor. Captain, Trix's voice crackled over the comm, tinged with urgency. You're gonna want to see this. Roan rushed to the viewport, the sight on the other side making his blood run cold. A new ship had entered the battlefield, its sleek design and ominous aura marking it as something far beyond the Accord's usual repertoire. What the hell is that? Mira breathed, her disbelief echoing Roan's own. Trouble, Roan replied, his mind racing to process this new twist. Looks like the Accord brought in the big guns. That's not just any big gun, Trix warned, tapping at her console with a grimace. That's Zyxum's ship. Zyxum, the alien envoy with a penchant for diplomacy through overwhelming firepower. If he was here, it meant the Accord was done playing nice. Great, Roan muttered, his sarcasm masking the dread curling in his gut. Just what we needed, a chance to get vaporized by an overgrown toaster. The ship bore down on them, its weapons charging with a chilling inevitability. Roan's mind raced, the weight of his crew's lives pressing down on him like a suffocating fog. We need to regroup, Mira said, her voice cutting through the tension. Fall back and rethink our options. Running's not gonna work, Roan said, shaking his head. We need a diversion, something to buy us time. Trix bit her lip, eyeing the thruster as if it held the answer. We could overload the thruster, send out a solar flare that'd blind their sensors for a bit. That's risky, Mira pointed out, skepticism lacing her words. Could blow us to bits. At this point, it's either that or get toasted by Zyxum's happy trigger finger, Roan replied, a wry grin on his lips. I vote we make them regret underestimating us. With a resigned nod, Trix set to work, her fingers flying over the controls like a virtuoso conducting a final, chaotic symphony. Roan's pulse thrummed in time with the ship, each second dragging them closer to potential oblivion. The plan was set in motion, the thruster building to a crescendo that reverberated through the ship. As the flare erupted, the bridge was bathed in light, the enemy ship momentarily blinded by their desperate gambit. Now's our chance, Roan shouted, spurring the rusty faithful into action. Let's get the hell out of here. The ship surged forward, dodging debris and enemy fire with a nimbleness born of necessity. As the battlefield receded behind them, the tension in Roan's shoulders eased, replaced by the flicker of hope that somehow, impossibly, they might survive. Looks like we've got a reprieve, Mira said, her relief tempered by the knowledge that they weren't out of danger yet. But for how long? Trix asked, her fingers still dancing over the controls, coaxing every ounce of speed from the battered ship. As long as we need, Roan replied, determination hardening his voice. We've come too far to let a pesky thing like reality stop us now. They flew on, the darkness of space a welcome refuge after the chaos of battle. But as they regrouped, The reality of their situation loomed larger than ever. "What do we do now?" Trix asked, glancing at Roan with the kind of trust that could be a burden or a blessing depending on the day. "We plan," Roan said, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. "We find a way to turn this into our advantage, and we hit them harder than ever before." "And if Zyxum decides to crash the party again?" Mira asked, her skepticism a familiar comfort. "Then we do what we do best," Roan replied, a defiant grin stretching across his face. "We adapt, we improvise, and we make them wish they'd never heard of the Rusty Faithful." The crew of misfits shared a look, a silent acknowledgement of their shared fate. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and teetering on the brink of disaster. But they were also united, driven by a singular purpose that transcended their fear. And in the end, that was what mattered. As the ship sailed through the void, a beacon of defiance in a universe determined to crush them, Roan allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Maybe they'd make it. Maybe they wouldn't. But as long as there was breath in his lungs and fire in his heart, he'd keep fighting. Because in this grim, unforgiving universe, that was all he really knew how to do. Roan Derek stood on the Rusty Faithful's bridge, staring into the yawning abyss of space like it owed him money. Around him, outdated tech blinked and hummed, as if in agreement with his unspoken curses against the universe. The ship was a patchwork quilt of near disasters and temporary solutions, each bolt a testament to Trix's mechanical wizardry, or sheer luck, depending on how you looked at it. "All right, crew," Roan drawled, trying to sound more like Han Solo than a man one tech failure away from catastrophic implosion. "Time to pull a miracle out of our collective asses." Again, Trix, her hair a mess of grease and determination, looked up from the console. "You sure you want to call it a miracle, Cap? Last time you did, we nearly kissed a black hole." "Details, details," Roan waved a hand dismissively. "We're still here, aren't we?" "By some cosmic joke," Mira muttered, arms crossed as she leaned against a bulkhead. "What's the plan this time? Turn the Accord's flagship into a giant disco ball." "Tempting," Roan admitted, tapping his chin thoughtfully. "But no, we're going to make them wish they'd stayed home and knitted instead of taking over galaxies." "What's knitting?" Trix asked, furrowing her brow. "Something old folks do with sticks and string," Mira explained with a smirk. "Sounds about as useful as trying to reason with a black hole." Roan sighed, suppressing a smile. "Focus, people. We've got the Space Misfits Club relying on us. If we can rally the other factions in the scrapyard, maybe, just maybe, we can turn this tide." "Factions?" Mira snorted. "You mean those guys who can't decide if they hate each other more than they hate us?" "Exactly," Roan grinned, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Misery loves company, and right now we're all miserable as hell." Trix nodded, the spark of an idea lighting up her face. "We could use the comms relay near the scrapyard. Send out a message. Rally the troops with some good old-fashioned bravado." "And how do you propose we do that?" Mira challenged, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "Last I checked, our ship's as charming as a rusted-out dumpster." But it's our rusted-out dumpster," Roan said, patting the wall affectionately. "And besides, we've got something they don't, a working thruster that occasionally plays nice." "The old consortium tech?" Trix asked, eyeing him with a mix of hope and disbelief. "You really think that'll work?" Roan shrugged. "We're running low on options, and I'd rather die spectacularly than go quietly." "Nice. Very optimistic," Mira deadpanned. "Look, all we need is to get people listening," Roan said. "Once they hear the plan, they'll have no choice but to join us." "And if they don't?" Trix inquired, her voice tinged with doubt. "Then I guess we'll find out what Zyxum's favorite color is when he blasts us to smithereens," Roan replied dryly. "But I'm betting on humanity's penchant for stubborn resistance." Mira rolled her eyes, but a hint of a smile lingered on her lips. "All right, Captain. Let's make them love us." With that, Trix got to work, her hands dancing across the console, sending signals through the scrapyard's network. Roan watched, his mind a whirl of strategies and the ever-present threat of failure. The comms crackled to life, and Roan cleared his throat, slipping into his best charismatic rogue voice. "Attention, all you spacefaring malcontents. This is Roan Derex, captain of the Rusty Faithful. First off, yes, we're still alive. And second, we've got a plan to kick the Accord where it hurts. Static filled the pause, and Roan imagined the other factions listening with varying degrees of skepticism and maybe a hint of curiosity. Or they were just curious to hear how they'd fail this time. We've all got our gripes with the Accord, Roan continued, leaning into the mic. But what if I told you we don't have to take it lying down? We've got the tech, the people, and frankly, the stupidity to make a stand. Great speech, Captain, Mira said sarcastically. How about you tell them about the part where we don't end up as space dust? Roan shot her a look but pressed on. We've got consortium tech, good old stuff that your grandma could rely on. It's not pretty, but it'll get the job done if we play our cards right. More static, then a voice crackled over the comms. And why should we trust you, Derex? Last time I checked, your ship was one bad day away from being a floating funeral pyre. True, Roan admitted, but it's a damned feisty pyre. Look, we're all here because the Accord screwed us over. It's time we stop fighting each other and start fighting back. Another voice joined in, gruff and filled with grudging respect. If you've got something that'll stick it to those Accord bastards, count us in. Roan grinned victoriously, pumping a fist silently. Then let's give them a show they'll never forget. As the comms faded, Roan turned to his crew, his expression a mix of determination and mischief. All right, people, let's get ready to ruin someone's day. With the other factions on their side, Roan felt a surge of adrenaline. They were still outgunned, outnumbered, and probably out of their minds, but at least they weren't alone. Trix was already scrambling to make adjustments, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and last-minute fixes. I'll push the thruster as far as it'll go, Captain. And I'll make sure our sensors don't get fried, Mira added, a hint of real optimism creeping into her voice. Roan nodded, feeling the weight of leadership settle comfortably on his shoulders. Let's do this. For once, let's show them what a bunch of misfits can do when they stop squabbling and start kicking ass. The Rusty Faithful lurched forward, propelled by Trix's handiwork and a healthy dose of reckless determination. As they approached the heart of the scrapyard, a dozen ships joined their formation, each a testament to rebellion and poor life choices. As the Accord's forces loomed ahead, Roan felt a strange calm settle over him. They were in for the fight of their lives, but at least they were going out swinging. The battle unfolded like a chaotic dance, blaster fire crisscrossing the void in a deadly tapestry. The rust rats and their newfound allies plunged into the fray, their ships bobbing and weaving like drunken acrobats. A voice crackled over the comms, Zyxum, smooth and deadly as ever. Captain Derex, I must admit your tenacity is admirable if misguided. Roan grinned, flipping to the open channel. Zyxum, long time no threaten. How's the megalomania? Zyxum chuckled, a sound like grinding gears. I prefer to think of it as ambitious management. Well, your management style is about to get a severe audit, Roan retorted, diving the Rusty Faithful into a tight roll to avoid incoming fire. Zyxum's ship loomed ever closer, its weapons casting an ominous glow. But the combined might of the scrapyard's factions was a force to be reckoned with, their collective desperation a formidable weapon. Mira called out from her station, her voice cutting through the chaos. We've got them on the ropes, Captain, but we need to keep the pressure on. Roan nodded, his mind working furiously. Trix, can you get us another burst from that thruster? Give them a little more to worry about. I'm on it, Cap, Trix replied, her fingers a blur on the controls. The thruster powered up, sending the Rusty Faithful rocketing forward with a speed that belied its battered hull. They punched through the enemy's lines, opening up a path for the other ships to follow. Looks like Zyxum's having second thoughts, Mira noted, eyeing the enemy flagship as it maneuvered away from the engagement. Good, Roan replied, adrenaline humming in his veins. Let's give him something to really think about. As the battle raged on, the tide began to turn in their favor. The Accord's forces were scattered, their usual tactics thwarted by the unexpected alliance of Scrapyard factions. It was then, in the midst of chaos and clashing forces, that Zixum's voice cut through the comms once more. "Captain Derex. Perhaps we may discuss terms." Roan blinked, momentarily stunned by the alien's words. "Terms? You mean like a truce?" Zixum's chuckle was rich with amusement. "More like an opportunity. I find myself in need of a recalibration of strategies." Roan exchanged a glance with Mira, who shrugged. "He's either serious or he's got one hell of a poker face." "All right, Zixum," Roan said, a grin spreading across his face. "Let's talk, but fair warning, I'm not easy to impress." As the battle began to wind down, the ships of the makeshift alliance regrouped, their presence a testament to what could be achieved when desperation and determination collided. Roan looked out at the stars, the remnants of battle flickering in the distance. They'd survived against the odds, and for once the universe seemed to be smiling upon them. "Well," Mira said, her voice filled with grudging respect, "looks like we might actually get through this in one piece." "Don't jinx it," Trix warned, though her eyes were bright with hope. "Either way," Roan replied, feeling an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. "We've proven one thing today." "And what's that?" Mira asked, her sarcasm softened by relief. Roan grinned, letting the moment sink in. "That even misfits can make a difference as long as they're too stubborn to give up." The Rusty Faithful and her ragtag crew drifted in the void, silently contemplating the battles won and those yet to come. But for now, there was a truce to be brokered and a new future to consider. Maybe they'd be the ones to rewrite the rules of the universe after all. Roan Derek stood on the bridge of the Rusty Faithful, staring through the cracked viewport at the scrapyard below. It looked less like a graveyard of forgotten dreams and more like a makeshift society. A society born from desperation and duct tape, but still somehow standing. Against all odds, the Ragtag Alliance had transformed this heap of cosmic garbage into something resembling a community. It was enough to make you believe in miracles, if you were the sort to believe in anything but your own two hands. "Who would have thought we'd end up here?" Roan mused aloud, scratching the day-old stubble on his chin. "A bunch of misfits turning a scrap heap into a thriving, well, into something that doesn't immediately smell of failure." "Thriving. Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Mira quipped from her station, arms crossed as she surveyed the scene with her trademark skepticism. "We're still one power surge away from a very public implosion." "True, but at least we have company now," Roan shot back, waving a hand at the collection of ships and people below. "Misery loves company, after all." Trix sauntered in, grease smudged across her cheek, and flopped into a seat with a dramatic sigh. "The thruster's holding up for now, but I'm not making any promises." "It's like asking a geriatric cat to chase laser pointers." "Keep it alive a little longer," Roan said. "We're not done with it just yet." The uneasy truce with Zixum had held. For now, the alien's fleet hovered in orbit, a silent reminder that peace was always a negotiation away from chaos. It was a fragile dance, and the galaxy was not known for its grace. "Zixum's keeping his distance," Mira said, glancing at her console. "I'm guessing he doesn't want to get his hands dirty unless he absolutely has to," Roan chuckled. "Typical managerial style. Take credit when things are running smoothly, point fingers when they crash and burn." The thought of Zixum pondering a recalibration of strategies amused Roan more than it probably should have. Maybe there was a universe where aliens in power suits attended board meetings to discuss the best way to oppress civilizations. Roan imagined it came with catered lunches and meticulously prepared agendas. "Well, we've finally got something to work with," Trix said. "A bunch of rebels, a ship that's more rust than metal, and a heap of old tech. It's like a bad joke waiting to happen." "But it's our bad joke," Roan replied, a grin tugging at his lips. "And if we're lucky, it'll punch the Accord right in the face." Optimism from Roan Derex, Mira feigned shock, splaying a hand over her chest. "The universe must be ending." "Oh, don't worry," Roan assured her. "I'm still expecting to crash and burn spectacularly. But at least we'll take some of those Accord bastards with us." The rusty faithful had seen better days. Hell, it had seen better centuries. But with a little ingenuity and a lot of stubbornness, it had become more than just a ship. It was a symbol of their defiance, a testament to the fact that even when the universe kicked you down, you got back up swinging. Roan had never aspired to leadership. He was more comfortable on the fringes, skirting the edges of trouble, but somehow he'd wound up at the center of something bigger than himself. It was both terrifying and exhilarating, like riding a roller coaster without a safety bar. The comms panel flickered to life, jerking Roan from his thoughts. A familiar voice crackled over the speakers. "Captain Derricks, are you there?" It was Zyxum, sounding almost cordial, as if they hadn't spent the last few months trying to outmaneuver each other. "Zyxum," Roan replied, "calling for a chat or just checking in on your investment?" "A bit of both, I suppose," Zyxum responded. "We find ourselves in a unique position, Captain. Your actions have sparked a change, unexpected but not unwelcome." Roan exchanged a glance with Mira, who shrugged. "If you've called to offer me an executive position, I'll need at least a week's vacation and a raise. I hear space tourism is all the rage." Zyxum gave that mechanical chuckle that grated on Roan's nerves. "I think you'll find the opportunities presented here more hands-on. You've managed to unite factions that have been at odds for longer than you've been alive." "Yeah, well, desperation makes strange bedfellows," Roan replied. "But if you've got a sales pitch, I'm all ears. Just know I'm a terrible listener before my morning coffee." "Perhaps," Zyxum mused, "but you've managed to turn this scrapyard into a beacon of hope. That is not something to be taken lightly." Roan snorted. "Hope is just a fancy word for we're not dead yet, but I'll take it. What's your angle, Zyxum?" "A mutually beneficial arrangement," Zyxum said. "The Accord is not the monolith it once was. There are others who share your unorthodox views." "Unorthodox," Mira interjected. "Is that code for suicidal? Call it what you will," Zyxum replied smoothly. "But the Accord could use a little shaking up, and you seem to have quite the knack for it." Roan leaned back, considering the proposal. They'd managed to survive this long by being unpredictable, by throwing the rulebook out the airlock and trusting their instincts. Maybe there was a way to keep that momentum going. "All right," Roan said finally. "Let's see where this ride takes us. But if you try to double-cross us, I'll personally see to it that your ship becomes a very expensive paperweight." Zyxum's laughter echoed through the bridge. "Noted, Captain. Let us see what changes our partnership can bring." As the comms went silent, Roan turned to his crew. "Looks like we're in the business of change, folks." "Who would have thought?" "Not me," Mira replied, "but I guess there's a first time for everything." Trix stretched, cracking her knuckles. "If we're gonna be in the spotlight, maybe we should fix the paint job on this old bucket. Just saying." "Paint won't fix the smell," Roan countered, a smirk playing on his lips. "But sure, let's give her a makeover. Heaven knows she deserves it." The Rusty Faithful was more than a ship. It was home. It was a relic of old battles and new beginnings, and now it was the heart of something new, a coalition of rebels and dreamers and those too stubborn to give in. The makeshift society in the scrapyard was a mess of contradictions, tense and hopeful, chaotic and oddly structured. The factions, once bitter enemies, were now allies of convenience, bound together by necessity and a shared disdain for the Accord. Roan wandered through the chaos, watching as people salvaged what they could from the wreckage. A group of former mercenaries was teaching kids how to weld, their laughter echoing through the scrapyard. Traders and scavengers swapped stores and supplies, building new networks from the ashes of the old. In the midst of it all, Roan saw a future taking shape. It was rough and unpolished, full of potential and pitfalls, but it was theirs. They'd carved out a place in the galaxy where none existed before, and that was something to be proud of. "Captain," a voice called, dragging Roan's attention from his thoughts. It was a young woman, her face smudged with dirt and determination. "They want to know what the plan is." Roan took a deep breath, letting the weight of leadership settle over him. He wasn't a hero or a revolutionary. He was just a man caught in the wrong place at the right time. but maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The plan, Roan said, meeting her gaze, is to keep going. We've shown them what we can do when we work together. Now it's time to build on that. We might be a bunch of mismatched parts, but that's what makes us stronger. The woman nodded, a smile breaking through the grime. We'll follow your lead, Captain. As she turned to relay the message, Roan felt a surge of something unexpected, hope. It was a dangerous thing, hope. It made people reckless, made them believe in things that could never be. But it was also powerful, a force that could change the galaxy. Roan returned to the Rusty Faithful, finding Mira and Trix exactly where he'd left them, engrossed in their respective tasks. So, Mira said, glancing up, are we officially a society now? Do we need a constitution or something? Trix snorted. Let's start with a list of things we're not allowed to explode. Sounds like a plan, Roan replied with a grin. We'll make it up as we go along, just like everything else. The ship hummed around them, a familiar comfort in the chaos. They had a long road ahead, battles still to fight and alliances to forge. But for the first time, Roan didn't feel like the universe was conspiring against them. Here's to new beginnings, he said, raising an imaginary glass. May they be less disastrous than the last. Mira raised an eyebrow. That's setting the bar pretty low, Captain. Low is where we thrive, Trix added. Keeps expectations manageable. Roan chuckled, the sound echoing across the bridge. Let's see what kind of trouble we can get into next. As the Rusty Faithful prepared to leave the scrapyard behind, Roan couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. They'd started as misfits, rebels without a cause, but now they were something more. They were a force to be reckoned with, a spark in the dark, and who knew what they might ignite next. With the scrapyard fading into the distance, Roan settled into the captain's chair, his thoughts a mix of uncertainty and resolve. They'd come a long way, but the journey was far from over. Whatever lay ahead, Roan knew they were ready. After all, they'd already survived the impossible. The Rusty Faithful and her ragtag crew had a galaxy to explore, and maybe, just maybe, they'd find a place where misfits could thrive. But for now, there was work to be done, and Roan Derricks was ready to face whatever the stars had in store. With a nod to Mira and Trix, Roan grinned at the vast expanse before them. Let's make some noise.